Chapter 1. The Inheritance. My brother Ethan and I never knew our great-aunt Evelyn very well. She was a distant figure in our family's lore, a woman who had fled the dust bowls of Oklahoma during the Great Depression and ended up in the cold expanses of Canada. By the time we were born in the late 1940s, she was already an old recluse living in a creaky Victorian house on the outskirts of Calgary, in the province of Alberta. Our parents, both American expats who had moved north for Dad's job in the oil fields after World War II, spoke of her rarely, and when they did, it was with a mix of pity and unease. Evelyn passed away in the winter of 1955, just as the first heavy snows blanketed the prairies. We were 7 years old then, Ethan and I, twins, inseparable in our mischief and our secrets. The news came via a telegram that Mom read aloud at the kitchen table, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly as she held the yellow paper. Dad grunted something about family obligations and said we'd have to drive out to her place to sort through her things. Nobody else in the family wanted to touch her estate. Most of our relatives back in the States had written her off as eccentric, or worse. The house was a relic, perched on a hill overlooking the Bow River, its paint peeling like old skin. Inside, it smelled of mothballs and forgotten time. Dusty curtains blocking out the weak January sun, furniture draped in sheets like ghosts. Evelyn had no children, no husband that anyone knew of, just a collection of oddities gathered from her travels or her delusions. Among the salvageable items was a large antique mirror, framed in dark oak carved with twisting vines and what looked like snarling faces if you stared too long. It was the kind of thing that might have been beautiful once, but now it reflected the room with a faint distortion, as if the glass were warped by years of neglect. "Nobody wants this old thing," Dad said, wiping his brow after loading boxes into the truck. "But your mom thinks it belonged to Evelyn's brother, the one who vanished back in the 20s. Sentimental value, I suppose." Mom nodded, her eyes distant. "Uncle Silas. He was just a boy when he disappeared. Evelyn always said he stepped into a mirror and never came out. Silly stories, but she believed them." Ethan and I exchanged glances, thrilled by the macabre tale. We didn't argue when they decided to bring the mirror home to our modest bungalow in Calgary's suburbs. It ended up in the attic, covered with a tarp, forgotten amid boxes of holiday decorations and old clothes. But from the start, we felt its pull, a subtle wrongness, like a whisper in an empty room. Chapter 2. The first glimpse. By the summer of 1956, Calgary was booming with oil money, and our family was settling into a routine. Dad worked long hours at the rigs, Mom volunteered at the church, and Ethan and I roamed the neighborhood on our bikes, chasing adventures in the nearby woods. But the mirror lingered in our minds. We'd sneak up to the attic on rainy afternoons, peeling back the tarp to stare at our reflections. The glass was cloudy, with faint scratches that formed patterns if you tilted your head just right, swirls that almost looked like maps or faces. Ethan's reflection always seemed a bit off, his eyes darker than mine, his smile crooked in a way mine wasn't. "It's like it's watching us," he whispered once, his breath fogging the surface. I laughed it off, but that night, I dreamed of stepping through the mirror into a vast, frozen wilderness, snow whipping around me as distant howls echoed. I woke up sweating, convinced I heard footsteps in the attic above my bed. Things started going missing soon after. Small items at first, a toy car I'd left on the attic floor, a button from Ethan's shirt. We'd search everywhere, but they were gone, as if swallowed by the house itself. Mom blamed our carelessness. Dad rolled his eyes, but Ethan and I knew better. We started calling it the whisper mirror, because sometimes, if you pressed your ear to the glass, you could hear faint murmurs, like voices trapped in static. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the Rockies, we dared each other to touch it. Ethan's hand pressed flat against the surface, and for a split second, the glass rippled like water. He yanked back, his palm cold and red. It felt like it pulled me, he said, eyes wide. From then on, we avoided the attic, but the dreams intensified. In mine, I saw a boy who looked like old photos of Uncle Silas, wandering lost in a blizzard, calling out for help that never came. Chapter 3. The arrival of cousins. The tension built slowly, like storm clouds gathering over the prairies. By 1960, we were teenagers, awkward and rebellious, chafing against the confines of our American roots in this Canadian landscape. Dad's job had stabilized, but money was tight, and family visits from the States became rare treats or burdens. That Christmas, our cousins from Seattle arrived, Lila and her little brother Tommy. They were boisterous, Lila with her sharp tongue and Tommy with his endless energy, bouncing off walls like a pinball. Our parents expected us to entertain them, keep them out of trouble while the adults drank eggnog and reminisced about the old country. Tommy's a nightmare, Ethan grumbled as we plotted in our shared room. Last time, he broke Mom's vase and blamed it on the dog we don't have. I nodded, remembering the chaos. We need a plan, something to tire him out. We settled on exploring the attic, figuring the dusty relics would bore him eventually. But when we led them up the creaky stairs, Tommy's eyes lit up at the sight of the mirror, now uncovered after a recent cleaning spree. Cool. It's like a magic portal. Lila rolled her eyes, but Tommy pressed his face against the glass, fogging it with his breath. I see something moving in there, he said, giggling. Ethan and I froze, exchanging panicked looks. We'd never told anyone about the whispers or the missing things. As the game turned to hide and seek, Tommy insisted on hiding first. We counted to 100, searching the house, but he was nowhere. The front door was locked, no footprints in the fresh snow outside. Then it hit us. The mirror. Racing back to the attic, we found the glass pristine, but a small handprint smeared on the surface, as if something had pulled him through. Chapter 4. The vanishing panic set in like a vice. Lila screamed when we told her, accusing us of playing a cruel joke. We searched again, tearing the house apart, but Tommy was gone. Our parents called the police, who combed the neighborhood, assuming he'd wandered off into the cold Alberta night. Ethan and I knew the truth, though we couldn't voice it. That night, as the wind howled against the windows, I stared at the mirror, seeing faint outlines in the reflection, shadows that weren't ours. It took him, Ethan whispered, his voice breaking. Like it took those toys. We covered it with the tarp again, but the damage was done. Lila blamed us, her eyes accusing as she huddled with her parents. The police questioned us endlessly. Why hadn't we watched him closer? Had we argued? The story we told omitted the mirror, sticking to a tale of a boy slipping out unnoticed. Guilt gnawed at us. Mom cried herself to sleep. Dad drank more than usual. And in my dreams, Tommy joined Uncle Silas in that endless white void, their voices merging into the whispers I'd heard before. Chapter 5. The investigation months dragged on, the disappearance unsolved. By spring 1961, Calgary buzzed with rumors, kidnappers, runaways, even wild animals from the foothills. Ethan and I withdrew, our twin bond straining under the weight of our secret point one day. A pair of men in crisp suits arrived at our door. They weren't local police. Their accents were American, clipped, and official. Special investigators, the taller one said, flashing a badge that looked too shiny. His name was Harlan Reed, his partner Victor Kane. They spoke to our parents first, then us separately. Harlan interviewed me in the living room, his eyes piercing like the mirror's reflections. You know about the mirror, don't you, Sarah? I nodded reluctantly, surprised he used my name so familiarly. He explained in a calm, salesman-like tone. The mirror wasn't ordinary. It was a conduit, a shortcut through space, created unwittingly by someone with latent psychic talents. Uncle Silas, Evelyn's brother, had been such a person back in 1923, his frustrations manifesting as a rift in the glass during a family argument. He'd stepped in to hide and emerged in the Yukon wilderness, far north, where he froze to death. And now, Harlan said, you and Ethan have strengthened it. Twins like you, with the same untapped potential. It's rare, but it happens. They'd found Tommy's body in a remote forest near Whitehorse, curled in snow, no tracks leading to him. Toys and trinkets scattered around, ours from years ago. Chapter 6. Revelations. Harlan's words unlocked a flood of memories. Ethan and I had always shared dreams, known each other's thoughts without speaking. We dismissed it as twin intuition, but now it felt ominous. The agents took the mirror, loading it into their black sedan under cover of night. We'll seal it away, Victor assured us. And you'll need to learn control. Awareness is key. But as they drove off, a chill settled. Our parents signed papers, agreeing to a fabricated story, a tragic accident, Tommy lost in the woods. No mention of the mirror or our abilities. Ethan confronted me that night. Did we do this? Did we make it happen because we hated babysitting him? I shook my head, but doubt lingered. The house felt emptier, the whispers gone, but in their place, a void that echoed our guilt. Chapter 7. The fracture. Years passed, the 1960s blurring into the 70s. We grew up, but the shadow lingered. Ethan moved to Toronto for university in 1968, studying psychology, perhaps to understand what we were. I stayed in Calgary, marrying a local engineer named Mark, trying to build a normal life. But the abilities simmered. I'd glimpse futures in reflections, car accidents, arguments, small things that came true. Ethan confessed over the phone to similar visions, and worse, he'd accidentally created a small rift in a window during a heated argument, sucking in a book that reappeared miles away. Our family fractured. Mom and Dad divorced in 1972. The strain of Tommy's loss too much. Lila never forgave us, cutting ties. And in 1975, during a visit home, Ethan and I argued fiercely about revealing our secret. In the heat, I felt a pull, like the mirror's grasp, and a vase shattered without touch. Chapter 8. The return. In 1983, as Calgary hosted the Stampede and the city thrived on oil booms, the past resurfaced. A letter arrived from Harlan Reed, now retired but warning us. Similar incidents were occurring. A family in Edmonton had lost a child to an old wardrobe, echoing our story. Ethan returned, gaunt and haunted. We have to face it, he said. Our powers are growing. If we don't control them, more will suffer. We experimented cautiously, meditating before mirrors, willing small objects through. It worked too well. One night, a cat vanished, reappearing in our backyard days later, frozen stiff. Guilt compounded. Mark left me in 1985, unable to handle my episodes. Ethan spiraled into isolation, whispering of Silas and Tommy haunting his dreams. Chapter 9. The climax. The breaking point came in 1992. During a family reunion, our attempt at reconciliation. A distant cousin's child, young Mia, wandered into our basement where we'd stored an innocuous-looking vanity mirror, a remnant of our experiments. She disappeared mid-game, her laughter cutting off abruptly. Panic ensued, but Ethan and I knew. We confronted the rift, stepping close, feeling the cold pull. In a desperate bid, Ethan tried to reach through, his arm vanishing up to the elbow. He screamed as visions flooded us. Silas's final moments, Tommy's terror, and now Mia's cries in a snowy expanse near Banff. We pulled back, but the effort shattered the mirror, shards flying like accusations. The agents returned. New faces, same suits. They contained it, but not before Mia's body was found, adding to our tally. Chapter 10. The fall. By 1999, as the millennium loomed, Ethan and I were shells. He'd moved back to Calgary, living in our old house, now a museum of regrets. I'd remarried briefly, but it ended in whispers of madness. We knew the truth. Our inheritance wasn't just the mirror, but a curse of untamed power. In quiet nights, we'd sit together, staring at blank walls, fearing every reflection. One evening, Ethan confessed. We could end it. Step through together, close the loop. I refused, but doubt crept in. As the new century dawned, I wondered if we'd create more rifts, more losses. The whispers returned, not from glass, but from within, echoes of Silas, Tommy, Mia, and the Americans who'd brought their demons north to I. In the end, we lived on, guardians of a secret that devoured us. Our tragedy etched in the frozen wilds of Alberta, where lost souls wandered forever. As the new millennium dawned over Calgary, the city transformed under the weight of its own ambitions. The oil boom of the 1980s had given way to a more subdued prosperity in the 1990s, with skyscrapers piercing the prairie sky like defiant fingers challenging the endless horizon. But for Sarah and Ethan, the twins who had carried the burden of their family's cursed inheritance for decades, the turn of the century felt less like a fresh start and more like the closing of a long, weary chapter in a book they never wanted to read. The house on the outskirts of the city, the same bungalow where the whisper mirror had first cast its shadow over their lives, stood as a silent sentinel to their shared torment. It was 2000 now, and the world buzzed with Y2K fears that had come and gone without incident. But for them, the real apocalypse had been internal, a slow erosion of the soul. Sarah sat on the porch that January morning, wrapped in a heavy wool blanket against the biting Alberta cold. The snow lay thick on the ground, a pristine white blanket that muffled the sounds of distant traffic on the Trans-Canada Highway. She was 52 now, her hair streaked with gray, lines etched around her eyes from years of sleepless nights and unspoken regrets. Ethan was inside, probably staring at the blank wall in the living room where the mirror had once hung, his own face a map of similar sorrows. They had aged together, bound not just by blood but by the invisible threads of their psychic legacy, a gift that felt more like a chain, dragging them through the frozen wilds of their memories. The events of 1992, when little Mia had vanished into that vanity mirror during the family reunion, had been the final fracture. The agents, those enigmatic figures in suits who seemed to materialize from the ether whenever the rifts grew too wide, had swooped in like vultures, containing the anomaly with their clinical efficiency. They had taken the shattered remnants of the mirror, sealed them in some undisclosed vault, and forced the family to swallow yet another fabricated tale. Mia had wandered off into the nearby woods during a game, lost to the elements in a tragic accident. The police reports were doctored, the witnesses' memories gently nudged into compliance through whatever subtle arts the agents employed. But Sarah and Ethan knew the truth, as they always had. Mia's small body, curled in the snow near Banff, had been found days later, surrounded by scattered toys from their childhood, relics spit out by the rift like unwanted crumbs. In the years that followed, the twins had tried to rebuild. Sarah had thrown herself into community work, volunteering at local shelters and churches, seeking redemption in acts of kindness that could never quite wash away the blood on her conscience. She remarried in 1995 to a quiet widower named Paul who worked as a teacher in the Calgary school system. He was kind, patient, unaware of the full extent of her secrets, though he sensed the shadows that clung to her like smoke. They had no children. Sarah couldn't bear the thought of passing on the curse, and their life was one of quiet routines, morning coffees, evening walks along the Bow River, weekends spent at stampede festivals where the crowds provided a temporary distraction from the whispers in her mind. Ethan, on the other hand, had retreated further into himself. After the Mia incident, he had quit his job as a psychologist in Toronto and returned to Calgary permanently, moving back into the family home after their parents passed away. Mom in 1989 from cancer, Dad in 1994 from a heart attack fueled by years of suppressed grief. Ethan spent his days researching parapsychology in dusty libraries, poring over old texts on wormholes, psychic phenomena, and dimensional anomalies. He corresponded with fringe scientists and conspiracy theorists online, back when the internet was still a novelty, dial-up modems screeching like banshees in the night. But his searches yielded little comfort. The agents had warned them that knowledge was dangerous, that delving too deep could reopen old rifts or create new ones. One evening in 1996, as the Olympic legacy from 1988 still echoed in the city's pride, Ethan had a breakthrough, or what he called one. He burst into Sarah's apartment downtown, his eyes wild with a mix of excitement and terror. "I've found something," he said, waving a sheaf of yellowed papers. "Uncle Silas, it's not just him. There are records from the 1920s, reports of similar disappearances in Oklahoma before Evelyn moved north. Families with twins, objects that became portals. It's genetic, Sarah. It's in our bloodline going back generations." She had listened, her heart pounding, as he laid out the evidence. Newspaper clippings from the Dust Bowl era, tales of children vanishing into wells or wardrobes during the hardships of the Depression. One account spoke of a pair of twin sisters in Tulsa who had summoned a doorway in a family heirloom trunk, leading to a desolate plain where the lost were said to wander eternally. The parallels were uncanny, and for a moment, Sarah felt a spark of hope, that understanding their curse could lead to control, perhaps even closure, but hope was fleeting. That night, as they discussed it over tea, a small rift appeared in the kitchen window, a shimmering distortion like heat haze over asphalt. Ethan reached out instinctively, and a cup vanished into it, reappearing seconds later on the counter, shattered and cold as if it had been plunged into ice. They sealed it quickly, using the mental techniques the agents had taught them: visualization, focus, a willful denial of the anomaly's existence. But the incident left them shaken, reminding them that their powers were not dormant, but simmering, waiting for emotional triggers like anger, fear, or even curiosity to be why 1998, as the world prepared for the millennium bug, Sarah and Ethan's relationship strained under the weight of their shared burden. Arguments flared over trivial things, dinner plans, holiday visits, but always circled back to the past. "We could have stopped it," Ethan would say, his voice breaking. "With Tommy, with Mia, if we'd just destroyed the mirrors sooner, and risked creating something worse." Sarah countered, "The agent said awareness is key. We have to live with it, control it." But control felt illusory. Sarah began experiencing visions more frequently, glimpses of alternate realities where the rifts had consumed entire families, or futures where she and Ethan stepped through voluntarily, seeking oblivion in the frozen wilderness. Ethan confessed to similar hauntings, dreams where Silas, Tommy, and Mia appeared as spectral figures, accusing them with silent stares. He started medicating, antidepressants and sleep aids that dulled the edges but couldn't erase the core. The turn of the century brought a forced reckoning. On New Year's Eve 1999, as fireworks lit up the Calgary skyline and crowds cheered in Olympic Plaza, Sarah and Ethan gathered in the old house. Paul was there, supportive but oblivious, toasting to new beginnings. But as the clock struck midnight, a subtle shift occurred. The air grew thick, and in the reflection of the living room window, Sarah saw not the city lights but a vast, snowy expanse, the same wilderness where the lost had been deposited over the decades. "Ethan," she whispered, gripping his arm. He saw it too, his face paling. Together, they focused, willing the vision away, but not before a small object, a photo frame from the mantel, tumbled into the rift, vanishing with a soft pop. It reappeared hours later on the porch, encrusted in frost, the glass cracked but the image intact, a faded picture of Uncle Silas as a boy, smiling innocently. That incident marked a turning point. In the weeks that followed, they decided to seek out the agents, or whatever organization they represented. Harlan Reed had long since retired, But his successor, a stern woman named Elena Vargas, responded to their discreet inquiry. She arrived in February 2000, her black SUV crunching over the icy driveway. Vargas was all business, her accent a neutral American drawl that betrayed no origins. "You've been managing well," she said over coffee in the kitchen. "But the rifts are evolving. Your abilities are maturing with age, becoming more potent." She explained that the organization, never named, always alluded to as the Bureau or the Cleaners, had monitored them for years. Similar cases dotted North America. A family in Montana with a haunted clock, twins in Vancouver who opened portals and paintings. The common thread was latent psychic energy, amplified by trauma or isolation, manifesting as shortcuts through space-time. "It's not magic," Vargas said. "It's physics we don't fully understand yet. Quantum entanglement on a macro scale, perhaps. But for people like you, it's personal." They asked about closure. Could the rifts be permanently sealed? Could they atone for the lives lost? Vargas shook her head. "Sealing one often opens another. An atonement? That's for therapists and priests. Our job is containment." But she offered a glimmer: training. In a remote facility near the Rockies, the Bureau ran programs for sensitives like them. Exercises in mental discipline, biofeedback machines to monitor psychic fluctuations, even experimental drugs to suppress the abilities. Sarah and Ethan enrolled that spring, spending months in isolation, learning to harness what they had long feared. The training was grueling. Mornings began with meditation sessions, visualizing barriers against the rifts. Afternoons involved controlled exposures, staring into mirrors under supervision, willing small objects through without losing control. Evenings were for therapy, dredging up the past, Silas's disappearance in 1923, Evelyn's grief that had poisoned the family line, Tommy's laughter cut short in 1960, Mia's innocent game turning fatal in 1992. Sarah excelled at the mental barriers, her practicality forging shields of willpower. Ethan struggled, his analytical mind overthinking the process, but he made progress. They met others there. A young man from Texas who had lost his sister to a rift in a family Bible, a woman from Quebec whose paintings came alive with portals. Sharing stories built a fragile community, a sense of not being alone in the vast, uncaring universe. By summer 2000, they returned to Calgary transformed, not cured, but equipped. The whispers faded, the visions became manageable echoes. Sarah reconciled with Paul, explaining just enough to bridge the gap. Ethan started writing, a memoir disguised as fiction, pouring their story into pages that might warn others without exposing the truth. But closure is never absolute. In 2001, as the world reeled from 9/11, a minor rift appeared during a moment of collective grief. Sarah felt it in her sleep, a pull toward the television screen reflecting the falling towers. She sealed it alone, but it reminded her of the fragility. Years rolled on. By 2005, Calgary hosted the centennial celebrations, the city alive with parades and optimism. Sarah and Ethan, now in their late 50s, had established routines. Sarah ran a support group for grieving families, ostensibly for those who lost loved ones to accidents, but subtly tailored for those touched by the unexplained. Ethan published his book anonymously, Shadows in the Glass, which gained a cult following among paranormal enthusiasts. Reviews called it hauntingly realistic. Little knowing the truth, in 2010, during the Winter Olympics in Vancouver, they traveled west for a reunion with distant relatives. Lila, Tommy's sister, had aged into a bitter woman, but time had softened edges. Over dinner, she confessed, "I always blamed you, but deep down, I knew it wasn't your fault. Kids disappear sometimes. Life's cruel that way." Sarah nodded, tears welling, unable to reveal the full story but finding solace in forgiveness. Ethan met a partner that year, a researcher named Clara who studied quantum physics. She didn't know about the rifts at first, but when he confided, she approached it scientifically, hypothesizing about multiverses and entanglement. Their relationship brought him joy, a late-blooming love that eased his isolation, yet the past lingered. In 2015, as oil prices crashed and Calgary faced economic downturns, Sarah experienced a severe episode. During a storm, lightning struck nearby, and a rift tore open in her bathroom mirror. She saw Mia's face, unchanged by time, pleading. It took all her training to close it, but the effort left her hospitalized with exhaustion. Ethan rushed to her side. "We're getting old," he said, holding her hand. "What happens when we can't control it anymore?" They discussed options, the Bureau's retirement facilities, where sensitives lived under constant monitoring, or voluntary suppression, experimental procedures to dampen the abilities permanently, at the risk of mental side effects. By 2020, as the world locked down for the pandemic, isolation amplified their fears. Confined to the house, reflections in windows and screens became potential threats. They Zoomed with Vargas's successors, receiving virtual training refreshers. The Bureau adapted, using technology to track anomalies remotely. Sarah used the time to reflect, journaling her life, the joys amid the sorrows, watching sunsets over the Rockies, laughing with Paul at bad movies, Ethan's rare smiles. She realized the curse had shaped them but not defined them entirely. They had loved, helped others, endured. In 2025, on the 65th anniversary of Tommy's disappearance, they visited Banff. Standing in the snow-covered forest where bodies had been found, they scattered flowers, symbols of remembrance for Silas, Tommy, Mia, and the unnamed others. As the sun set, painting the mountains gold, Sarah turned to Ethan. "We've carried this long enough. Maybe it's time to let go." He nodded. But how? That night, in a lodge overlooking Lake Louise, they meditated together, visualizing not barriers but acceptance, a gentle closing of the internal rifts. No anomalies appeared. Instead, a peace settled. The conclusion of their story wasn't dramatic. No final confrontation or revelation. It was quiet, like the prairies under snow. They lived on, guardians of secrets, but freer. The whisper mirror's legacy faded into memory, a tale whispered to the wind, lost in the vast Canadian wilderness. Paul passed in 2030, leaving Sarah to her twilight years in a cozy condo. Ethan and Clara traveled, lecturing on hypothetical physics. The Bureau checked in occasionally, but the rifts grew rared in their final days. Sarah in 2045, Ethan following months later. They dreamed of the lost ones waiting in a warm light, forgiving. The curse ended with them, the bloodline's echoes silenced. But stories like theirs never truly end. In some distant corner, another twin might stare into a reflection, feeling the pull, and the cycle whispers anew.